I feel in need of a little warmth tonight. Hanukkah has just ended and it feels like winter is coming and I feel cold and sad. So hopefully we can create a little heat and spirit between us. Let's see. We were off last week, so let's just kind of reorient ourselves. I hope everybody had a beautiful Hanukkah illuminated holiday. There's a question I have every week when I'm thinking about the next class, question about just how detailed we want to get here, how granular we want to go in our analysis of, after all, as I keep saying, this big thick book, and there's so much in here. There's so much to learn. Jewish prayer is, I would say, almost cumbersome in its density, and so we can't cover it all. And I do think that part of what we're trying to do here is really just get literacy, just get familiar with this. So there's a tension there. On the one hand, we want to see the big picture, but on the other hand, there's a temptation to go deep, and I'm constantly negotiating that tension. But I say all of that to say that I do think that at this point in our conversation, we do have to go deep. We do have to get pretty granular here, because we arrived at the core structure of our prayers, which is made up primarily of two units, the Shema and the Amidah, right? The Shema prayer, which we say morning and evening, and the Amidah, meaning the standing silent prayer that we say morning, afternoon, and evening. And so they come together, and two of them match up with 2 out of 3, and then the afternoon prayer only has an Amidah. We've talked in this series a lot about how did we get to an Amidah? Why do we do it in the morning? Why do we do it in the afternoon? How did it get joined up with the Shema, and how are they different, the Amidah and the Shema? And we've talked and thought about that. But the Amidah, in some ways, is real, even though the Shema is there in the Torah and is more officially the most important of our prayers. It's really the Amidah, this standing silent prayer, that comes to be thought of as Jewish prayer. The heart, the core of Jewish prayer is the Amidah. That's the thing we repeat 3 times a day, and that is the thing that our sages in the Talmud referred to as tefillah, prayer. So that's a little bit that you have to hear that carefully, because it is our general word for prayer, tefillah. But when the Talmud says, and then he says tefillah, they're referring to the Amidah. So they'll say, you say Shema, and then you say tefillah. So you can even hear in that the Amidah is sort of that's the centerpiece. It becomes the centerpiece. And the Shema leads into the Amidah, but then that too suggests that the Shema is preparation for this centerpiece, this core of our prayers. So we say it 3 times a day. It's prayer itself. We certainly, I think, at this point have to go into it and see what's there. What is in that prayer that we say over and over? If we have a mantra in this tradition, it's Shema. Shema Yisrael, it's just like a mantra. But if we have a kind of fixed recitation of a prayer, it is the Amidah. And there's some question then, why are we saying these words, these exact words? And I would say, just like while we're all, on this road of becoming more adept at Jewish prayer, I would recommend to you to memorize the Amidah. That's a good skill. It's hard. There's a lot there, but it takes a while. But once you do, then you kind of have Jewish prayer in your back pocket. At least for most days of the week, you can go anywhere and just recite your Amidah. So So this is it. This is the formula. And the question is, how did we get to this formula? So we're gonna take a look at that tonight. And in particular tonight, we're gonna get to thinking about how we got not just to the words, but to the blessings themselves, and to the number of blessings that we have. And the number of blessings that we have in the Amidah, well, we'll see. But I will tell you that the Amidah is also referred to as the Shmoneh Esrei, which means the 18. Okay, so you now have three names for this central prayer. Amidah, because it's a standing prayer, and Amidah means standing. Tefillah, sometimes it's just called prayer. It is the core of prayer. But another way to refer to it, you'll see it referred to it this way, spoken of, or even in the prayer book, is the Shmoneh Esrei, the 18. So we're going to look at these 18 blessings and how we got to 18. Okay, so let's say a blessing, and then just over our Torah study tonight, and then we'll get into it with the help of Maimonides, of the great Maimonides. Okay. Blessing over the practice of Torah study, the life-sustaining practice of Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so Maimonides, I just said Maimonides is going to help us, and Maimonides is just so helpful in situations like this, where there is a massive Talmudic discussion that would take us a year to study and understand how it got boiled down into the prayer that stands before us. Maimonides, maybe the greatest of the medieval rabbis, Maimonides takes it upon himself to condense and summarize the entire Talmud. Somewhat controversially, actually, because he says, I've kind of spelled it all out. Now you don't even have to learn the Talmud. I did it for you, right? And that was a somewhat shocking thing to say, but he's right that he does make it all very clear and laid out. And so he's going to tell us a story, and he's not just making this story up, he's drawing it from Talmudic discussions, but he's going to tell us a story about how we got to these 18 blessings. And to do that, he's going to start by talking about what it was like before the 18 blessings. What was prayer like back in the good old days? So that's where we're going to start, is back in the good old days, at least as Maimonides imagines them. And here's a source sheet for you, which you can click on, or I'll just share it on screen here. But we're going to start tonight with a teaching from Maimonides. We're in Maimonides' great code of law, the Mishnay Torah. He is known in the great wide world more for his guide to the perplexed, but in the little Jewish world, he's primarily known for this, the Mishnay Torah, his legal work. And we actually looked at this piece last week because we've been thinking about all of the things, that led us here today. We've been thinking about what exactly is the original obligation to prayer, and where does it come from? And Maimonides is the one that told us, we read this piece last week, I'll just remind us again, that the number of prayers, these three prayers that we say, does not actually come from the Torah. The Torah doesn't say pray in the morning, evening, and afternoon. That was something we had to do a little interpretive work. Remember, if you were with us, that Abraham is said to have fixed the morning prayer, but that's like an imaginative history, right? And then remember that we also have a different history, which is that these prayers come as a replacement for the morning and afternoon sacrifices. There are lots of sources for this structure that we have, but suffice it to say, the source is not some verse in the Torah that says, hey, everybody, pray 3 times a day. Okay, so that's not in the Torah. And all the more so, the standard liturgy is not derived from the Torah. So whatever's in this prayer book, this isn't a quote from the Torah. This is stuff that was written later, or at least there are things that are quote from the Torah, but at least the Amidah itself is not a formula that we got from the Torah, and that's significant. So we're saying this prayer every single day, 3 times a day, and yet it wasn't in the Torah. So that means Moses didn't say this prayer every day, right? Like our ancestors didn't say this prayer every day. Okay, so the standard liturgy is not derived from the Torah, and there's no fixed time for prayer in the Torah, right? That we've been saying all along. These 3 times that we pray, it seems like the rabbis decided at a certain point, oh, let's map out a 3-a-day prayer system. Okay, so none of it is from the Torah. The Torah didn't command us to do any of this, and certainly not the words of the prayer. So what does that mean? Does that mean that Moses didn't pray at all? Or maybe, as other medieval scholars assert, maybe they prayed only in times of crisis. That's a possibility. Prayer wasn't something you do every day. Prayer was something you did when you needed to talk to God. So yes, Moses prayed, and we even have record, Vitpalel Moshe, Moses prayed, but he prayed because there was a great catastrophe and he needed to, remember the original word for prayer, to intercede on behalf of the people, right? That was the first class he did. What is prayer? Prayer is some kind of interceding on behalf of the people or oneself. So what was prayer back then? And I just suggested there is a debate, different thoughts about, well, did Moses have to pray? Maybe he didn't have to pray at all. Maimonides has a particular take. And now this isn't just his quoting from the Talmud. He decides that of all the possible understandings of early prayer, this is the one that he decides he believes in. And so let's take a look at his understanding of, again, the good old days, like the days of early prayer before the Amidah. So what was the obligation? He believed that there was an obligation, and it is as follows. A person should pray and plead every day. B'chol yom, every day. Speaking the praises of God, and then asking for anything one needs in the form of requests and pleas. The language here in the Hebrew is bakasha and tchina. Those are 2 requests and pleas. And then give thanks to God for the good God has bestowed. Everyone, now look at this phrase here. Everyone according to their ability. It sounds almost Marxist, right? Everyone according to their ability. Kol echad lefi kocho. Okay? So I want you to imagine, like, this is the ancient system, and it's pretty loose. I mean, as Maimonides understands it, it is at least structured in one way, which is that you have an obligation to pray every day. You got to pray every day. But everyone according to their ability, first of all, it's you pray based on, I don't know, what's on your heart, what you need, what's going on, what praises you feel like saying about God that day. And who knows, like maybe you've got a lot to say, maybe you're very articulate, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't have a lot to say. Maybe today or maybe never. So that's basically the system. And Maimonides wraps up, and then I'll pause for a moment and see what you think of this early system before we get into all the words of our prayer book. Maimonides sort of wraps up by saying, okay, remember, everyone can do it. It does it according to their ability. And he says, listen, if you are well accustomed to it, then you should do more. You should increase your pleas and requests. But if you have difficulty speaking, and here it seems to mean that you're not articulate, you're not, anything from you literally have a speech impediment, or you're not a verbal person, then one need only speak as much as one can whenever one needs to. And so it is with the number of the prayers. Everyone does them in accordance with their ability. Some pray once a day, and some pray many times a day, and all pray facing the place of the temple wherever they are. So he sort of sneaks in. There's one rule here. When you do pray, you should face the temple. That's sort of, okay, so there's some standardization, but mostly, it's up to you it's all up to you, with a little bit of encouragement that if you know what you're doing, well, then you should pray a lot. And so it was, he says, V'ken haya hadavar tamid, since the days of Moses until the time of Ezra. Okay? So it's a little vague intentionally. It's just sort of up to you, everyone according to their ability. But let's just stop here before we start building an entire prayer system, and just think a little bit about whether this original system was a good system. I mean, ask yourself, would you like this to be Jewish prayer? Because this was Moses's Jewish prayer. So would you like to have a prayer system where you just pray? There's a general idea that we would like to hear from you every day, but whatever you're feeling up to, whenever you're feeling up to, that's prayer. Okay, so what do we think of that system? Do we like that system? Would we prefer it? Are there any problems with that system? Are there any concerns with that? If I were to begin to that loosey-goosey kind of system, if I were to start a critique. So I invite critique, but I also invite you to prefer this to the dense prayer book that we have in front of us. So Hal, what do you think? Can't hear you yet.
What strikes me about this is there's no communal or collective dimension to it. Everybody is just doing as they see fit in their own time by themselves. So, I don't know why that's so terrific in Rashi's mind, but yeah, there's no accommodation for praying as a group or as a community.
Yes, that's great. Kathy, were you going to add to that?
I was just going to say, since, a big part of going to services is seeing everybody.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah. Okay, great. So that's a glaring and important point to start with. If prayer is discretionary, the nature of the prayers is up to you, then there's a loss here, at least as we know prayer. What they didn't have was communal collective prayer. Now, that, first of all, is true in a couple of ways. Hal was talking about the minyan, the quorum, the 10 people getting together and assembling to say the same prayer. That's something people can only do, or maybe not. I don't want to speak in over simplifications, but we can see how having a shared prayer is a thing that brings people together to pray. Maybe people could gather together and each say their individual prayer. I mean, let's imagine different forms. I don't mean to be too binary in this, but there is a way in which if we all are getting together, presumably we're all saying the same prayer. But more than that, even if we're not getting together, I'm now adding, there's also a sense in which we have communal prayers because we know we all say the same prayers every day. And that in itself is it comforting? Is it communal? Is it uniting? But if the idea is I just once a day, I will just say the prayers that are on my heart, well, there's nothing communal about that at all. Now, I must hasten to say, as Maimonides imagines, that's since the days of Moses until the time of Ezra. Some of that time, there was a temple standing, as we have been thinking about. We're all of Jewish prayer, as we know it, is in the shadow of the temple. The temple was gone. Now what do we do? So while the temple was around, maybe this system makes sense because you don't need prayer to be the thing unites you. The temple is the place where everybody gathers. Okay, so that's a good seed to a hypothesis as to why might we need a standard form of prayers. Okay, let's continue to evaluate this system of loosey-goosey prayer. Florine?
I think it's a description of where most Jews in America are today. Sorry. I think that's pretty much the approach that most people take, whether they're in a synagogue with other people or whether they're alone. I think the consciousness of being in communal prayer, we're there to elevate others. I'm not sure that's there yet. So I don't.
Wait, Florine, clarify for me. Are you saying that you think that most people today, most Jews today, their real experience of prayer is, just whatever's on my heart?
Yeah,
Right?
solitude, pleading, praying for whenever, not very systematic. But even if it's said in a communal setting, I don't believe yet that everyone has risen or understands how to rise to the communal essence of uplifting each other.
Okay, excellent. So this is good. Florine is sort of threading an interesting needle for us. That is, she is suggesting, and I think it's a suggestion to take with great consideration here, suggesting that really what Maimonides is saying, the way it was, that's really the prayer. That's prayer. That's what makes sense. And most Jews, most people, even if they're going to synagogue, if they're having any kind of prayer experience, the real prayer is the one that, I know we're all gathered here together, but the real prayer, the most authentic prayer, would be the one that I just emerged from my heart. And I think that's a very important position to keep in mind, because as we move forward, first of all, into the 18 blessings, but into this big book, we've noted this concern before. Are we getting too wordy? Are we getting too standardized? Are we getting too formal? Shouldn't it be just the natural prayer that emerges from my heart? And I say threading a needle because Florine sort of counterbalanced that point by also suggesting that, well, we do now have communal prayer. We do gather together in a building, but to a certain extent, and we may even open up the prayer book at the time of the Amidah and we'll all recite, but to a certain extent, the truest part of us we're all left to our own hearts when we go silent there. Maybe the truest part of us actually begins to diverge one from the other. So we're kind of, Florine is taking Hal and Kathy's concern into account. There is something valuable about being together and lifting each other up. But on the other hand, there's something that feels a little more natural about just speaking out the words of my heart. So we're in a tension where standardization has some pitfalls to it that we might want to avoid if, after all, the original prayer system was not formulaic. All right, let's take a couple more thoughts and then we'll press forward. Rabbi Zaki?
Thank you. I was thinking, actually, aren't there 19 prayers instead of 18?
Oh, spoiler. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay,
yeah.
But that's not what I was really thinking. I was actually thinking about when I first wake up in the morning and when we use the bathroom, and then we're grateful for our breath and that all the organs are doing what they're supposed to do. And so that's a personal prayer.
Yeah.
And then we come in with community. I mean, I do my tefillah very different. It depends on where I'm at. I mean, not physically where I'm at, but where I am emotionally. A lot of times I'll just put my fingers in the very end of the Amidah and I just go silent. But I hear the communal part at the beginning. I participate in that and then I go silent. And then if I'm really needing, like during Shabbat, when I need to give more healing, focus to healing of loved ones, I put more energy there. So it really depends on where I'm at the moment, and weekday versus Shabbat, and just wanted to add that.
That's great. Okay, so this is really wonderful because we're starting to see, and Rabbi Zaki gives us yet another. We're starting to see two kind of vectors here, two axes emerging. One of which is the communal individual experience. Am I alone in my prayer, or am I with others? And what is the value of either end of those experiences? And then on another axis, you have what is the standardization, the formalization of prayers versus the spontaneous free expression of prayers. And Rabbi Zaki reminds us that it isn't standardization equals communal one-to-one, because I can get up in the morning and say a formula, Modeh ani lefanecha. I can go to the bathroom and I will recite the blessing that the sages have composed for me. But I'm all alone. And yet there's still some value, or we've fallen into maybe it's not a value. Maybe it's a habit. Maybe it's a tendency. Maybe we end up standardizing everything. But what Rabbi Zaki was describing was a personal experience of prayer that was assisted by the text of the formal prayers. And then Rabbi Zaki kind of went back and forth and said, sometimes I'm with people, but I want more spontaneous prayer. Sometimes I'm by myself, but I have a formal prayer. So you can see how you can map these two variables in different places along our axes here. Okay, so that's good, because now we're starting to see what some of the costs and the gains of each of these modes, but especially the costs and gains of standardization and spontaneity in our prayers. All right, we're going to take comment from Payam, a comment from Marvin, and then we're going to finally get to 18. Payam.
This is sounding like the prosperity gospel, and it's rather dangerous. I mean, to me, it's the opposite of Jewish prayer. It's the sense that God is the one who bestows everything on people, and the reason you don't have it is because you don't praying enough. You know, he's emphasizing a lot more the pleading aspect of it and the wanting, versus what I see as modern Jewish prayer, which is thankfulness. And you know, the religious life is a humble life in which you want less and less, and you're thankful for the stuff you have, instead of begging God for riches. And you know, like, if the poor people don't have anything, pray more for it.
This is great. Okay, good. Payam is kind of taking us to the next level and beginning to wonder, wait, it isn't just words that they are standardizing. They're standardizing prayer modes, prayer themes. And we've seen some of them come up already. And if we walk away with one piece of core Jewish knowledge tonight, we will look at the three different kinds of prayers that are in the Amidah. And Payam begins to allude to them when he says, wait, what I'm seeing so far is that there's a lot of emphasis on your, let's go back here, on your needs, on prayer as the calling out for what you need, requests, pleas, right? There's an emphasis here. And that emphasis will continue as the Amidah gets developed. And Payam wonders if that is really the best centerpiece for our prayers. Isn't there a more advanced form of prayer? And there were other kinds of prayers that are mentioned, like speaking the praises of God. So think about it for a sec. Is it a higher form of prayer to just be praising? Is that higher than to be begging? There are different modes of prayer, and the question is, if I were left to my own devices, what would my prayer be? Not just the words, but would I just be saying, God, you are fantastic, I love you? Or would I say, God, you are fantastic, I love you, and I also really need a job. Help me find a job, right? So this thinking about what it means to obligate us, to formalize us in prayer, takes us into this realm of also not just the words, which you're going to pay a lot of attention to tonight, but also the nature of the prayer itself. Should we standardize that? Because is there a kind of prayer that we want people saying, right? And who's the we? Who is the we that wants? Well, we'll soon see, right? But that you can see that question number. Wait, who's telling me how to pray? Who decided this anyway? Okay, Marvin, let's hear one last thought on this early form of prayer before we move forward.
You know, what I see is going back to some of the earlier talks, when we have to decide whether the prayer is communal for the benefit of the Am. If you go back to the sacrifices, there was the Tamid, which was for everyone, but then there were individual sacrifices. What comes to my head is the Chatas, for sins, but there were other prayers that you were asking things for. And it's important to decide or I guess to inculcate together what the different prayers are for and what is the purpose of prayer. And if you have no personal thing to ask for, and there is an obligation to pray on behalf of the congregation, then I think you need some structure. If you left it completely yourself without any structure, without any commandment of what to do or what to say, then it's hefker. It's,
So this is really, really helpful, what Marvin's just said, really, really helpful, because Marvin's picking up on a theme that has been with us from the start, that Hal first raised, which is the theme of the community and how prayer bonds me to the community. But Marvin is taking a slightly different approach to that theme, which is that Hal, I think, and I certainly jumped in this spirit as well, was thinking about the way it benefits me to be in a community, the experience of being a community, or maybe the way that it benefits my prayer. But there's something about gathering together that we will all be better for. But Marvin is thinking about it slightly differently and saying the community has its own concerns. The community, it's not just what the community can do for me, but what I can do for my community, right? The community has its own concerns, its own sins, its own needs, and there should be some space, or once we're speaking in the language of Judaism, the Jewish people, the practices we start to think, well, wait a minute. Just like Marvin says quite rightly, in the earlier system of animal sacrifice, some sacrifices were offered on behalf of all of Israel. So what about those? Those you're not going to be just saying in your own bedroom, right? How could you personally pray for all of Israel? That we have to come together to do. So that's also an important concern, and it takes us perfectly into this next stage of development, because I do want us to have Marvin's concern in our minds. What are the needs of the whole community, and how might prayer be servicing those needs as well as my particular needs? And how important is that to you, that I pray for Israel as opposed to just for myself? So think about some of those things. But I will say the dilemma that will take us into a more formal standardized prayer is different than anything that has come up so far. It is a communal concern, but it's a different one, and I find it rather surprising. I think if you haven't seen it, you will too. Now remember, this is a big move here, and Maimonides signaled it because he said, "Oh, so it was. That was the nature of the prayers from the days of Moses until who? Ezra." Until Ezra, because Ezra is the leader of the new settlement that comes back from the Babylonian exile. The temple was destroyed. We're talking a lot about the time the temple was destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era, but that was the second time. Temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in the year, 586 BCE or something like that. And the Israelites were sent into exile for 70 years in Babylon, right? By the rivers of Babylon. And then they come back. And when they come back, Ezra, the leader of this community, now it's just once you hear Ezra, you start thinking about new institutions, because that's what Ezra is sort of famous for, is coming back and looking at the situation, a kind of an exile community regathering. I mean, the only parallel we have to it in our era is like the refounding of the state of Israel. Like, what does it mean to come back and not really know how to do this, but try to reboot an entire communal life? And so Ezra is known for new institutions, and they're called takanot, mitaken, to institute something, to fix something into place. There are lots of things that Ezra fixed into place. I recently spoke at Ikar about one of them, which is the public reading of the Torah. That was an Ezra idea. Let's get the Torah and read it to the people. Actually, it was Ezra's idea to fix that. The people called for it themselves. But Ezra has all these institutions, and one of them, as we'll soon see, is the text, exactly what we're looking at tonight, the text of the prayers. But look at how, at least as the story has been told and then recorded by Maimonides, look at how those 18 blessings came to be and why they came to be. It's a very interesting passage in Maimonides' history of prayer here. Okay, so part 2, getting to 18. How do we get to these 18 blessings? Now, when Israel was exiled in the days of Nebuchadnezzar the Wicked, they intermingled with Persia and Greece and other nations, as you do in diaspora, right? And they had children in foreign lands. And by the way, some of those children were with foreign partners, right? And that's one of the other things Ezra was very concerned about. And these children spoke hybrid languages, and everyone spoke a different dialect. Right? That is in the Hebrew here, me'orevet miloshonot. The languages were all mixed together. And when they had to speak, they could not express themselves clearly. Oh, there's a typo there. Clearly in one language, but instead some hodgepodge. Instead, some shibush, some hodgepodge, as it says, and it says in the book of Nehemiah, and their children spoke half in Ashdodite, and could not recognize Jewish speech, and spoke according to the language of each nation they were in. Okay, so the children of the exile, they spoke all kinds of hybrid language, all kind of pidgin mashup languages, like Hebrewish, languages. You think of Yiddish, right? Think of all kinds of. They now speak a different language, as you do when you are what do you call it? An immigrant, an exile. And because of this, when one of them would pray, they would cut short their prayers for their needs or their attempts to praise God in the holy tongue. And it got to a point where Hebrew itself was getting mixed up with other languages. Now, this is quite okay, that's an interesting situation, but what an interesting response here. When Ezra and his court saw this, they arose and instituted the 18 blessings in their order. Okay? So there you have it. That's the introduction. That's the Amidah. Those are the 18 blessings. Next week, we're going to go even deeper and look at them one by one. But that's, as far as Maimonides is concerned, that's where we got it. They didn't exist before that. And we came back and there was a problem, a language problem. And when Ezra saw that, he said, you know what we need is 18 blessings that people will say 3 times a day, every day. And that's how we got to the Amidah. Now, okay, that's an answer of some sort, but it's not a very clear answer, is it? I mean, what was the problem? I mean, on some level, he described it, right? But let's keep thinking about what was the problem. They didn't speak Hebrew very well. And why is this a solution? And so here's what we'll do. We'll create a standard recitation of Hebrew prayers. What's happening there? Why does Ezra think that's the way to solve, I don't know, the language problem? I mean, and as I ask the question, let me remind you, we got a language problem, right? I didn't grow up with Hebrew on my tongue. I don't speak it fluidly. Many of us don't know Hebrew at all. Here we are in the exile, right? Or maybe the chosen exile, the diaspora. So these are real. We get these concerns. But why would a prayer book help us? What's Ezra's? If you be Ezra and try to tell us, like, what is he thinking here? How is he solving the problem? Okay, let's turn to Ariella.
I think that Ezra was trying to unify and kind of get everybody on the same page, because they said some people's prayers were short, some people this, that, the other thing, so that they wanted to have it standardized.
Good. Right. So there's a kind of egalitarian theme here that Ezra wants to make sure everybody has access to the prayers. Everybody's saying the same prayer. We're all doing. Now, I don't know, actually, maybe it's not egalitarianism for the sake of equality. Maybe it's more like just standardization for some other purpose or value. But that's right. Ezra wants to get everybody on the same page. He's worried that everybody's speaking differently. Joe, what are you seeing here?
I kind of see it the same way, like the way scientists, botanists, or taxonomists use Latin, in the sense that they can understand each other and be talking about the same thing and be referring to the same thing, whether you're, because I'm sure in exile and in a diaspora, Jews are traveling, they might be migrating, they might not necessarily stay in the same physical or geographic location, and they might be around other people who don't speak the same language, but they could still daven together. Yeah,
good. So there's a value to having an official language, a lingua franca of tradition. And that language, maybe in science will be Latin. In our tradition, it's got to be Hebrew. And, maybe I'm just sort of extending Joe's thought here, like if everybody is, not only do we have people saying all kinds of different things, but there's some way in which there's no Hebrew itself is in danger, first of all, and we're going to need some language that itself is a unifying force. Great. Okay. Let's keep going here. Rabbi Zaki again.
I'm sorry. I was thinking actually how easy it would be to pray for something that's not within our faith values, by using the wrong word that may be very similar. Like many people say echad and really emphasize the dalet at the end. And if they don't do it, they might not be saying about one God. They might be saying about, something different. I'm just throwing that out, but how easy that would be to say the wrong word.
Okay, good. So right. It isn't just that people aren't on the same page. It's also that, who knows what people are saying in their various languages? And if they're saying the right thing, and are there even the right words for the things that we should be praying about? And then I think Rabbi Zaki is also adding, and then there's a little bit of an educational concern here. Just like it's important to know Hebrew. I mean, look at the language that Maimonides uses here. First of all, when one of them would pray, they would cut short their prayers for their needs because they didn't know how to speak in Hebrew, so they just give up. So that seems like the problem is they simply wouldn't say their prayers. But then there's another concern where it got to a point where Hebrew itself was getting mixed up with other languages. And this, I think, is part of the concern that Rabbi Zaki is articulating, which is that we're going to lose the very tradition. We're going to lose Hebrew, but we're also going to lose the concepts that Hebrew holds for us. Okay, which is, and now we've really arrived at a remarkable fact of Jewish prayer to consider, which is that at this point, it seems that part of the purpose of our standard prayers is to keep us knowing the words of Hebrew, to keep us not just standardized for its own sake, but to make sure we don't forget. Prayer then becomes a kind of a language training program. language. Let me show you the last lines here in this piece by Maimonides, which echoes a lot of what we've been saying, but this is also that the prayers would be ready on everyone's tongue and could be learned quickly. And so the prayers of those who spoke poorly could still be as complete as the prayers of the most articulate people. So there you go. That's Rabbi Zaki's worry that one person will know how to pronounce echad, but the other person won't. But let's standardize it. Let's fix it in place so that everybody knows exactly what to say. And so they instituted all the blessings and the prayers in a fixed order so that they would be on the tongues of all of Israel, so that every blessing would be laid out clearly for those who spoke poorly. So there seems to be some idea that the prayers ought to be said in Hebrew, that Hebrew is the best way to say the prayer, but there's a problem. We don't know Hebrew, so we're going to use the prayers to retrain people in Hebrew. Now, is that a good use of prayer? I mean, I get what Ezra's doing, but what a strange thing to take this moment of connection to God, this sort of window in my day for spirituality, and to turn it into a kind of re-education, a kind of language training, ulpan. Is that a good prayer agenda? I'm a little surprised by it. Okay, let's turn back to Florine.
Okay, I guess what's bothering me here is I don't see any discussion of whether Hebrew is a holy language, number one. That's the first thing I want to know. Or is it an ethnic language, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in there and say, yes, it is unstated, but it seems implicit here that although who knows, but I think it actually is a good question. Is Ezra's concerned that they are not saying speaking in the divine, the holy tongue, which will actually connect to God? Or is Ezra's concern just like, we got to get these people to be Jewish again? They got to speak their language. Is it cultural re-education, or is it getting them back to the pure and holy source? Please continue.
I have another one. In cross-cultural training, we learn that imported, exported words, even though people use those words, they don't come with the same connotations or same definitions, i.e. the word democracy is used in Japanese, but it refers to institutional democracy. It doesn't have a meaning of social democracy. So this happens even in English, words we import and words we export. They're not, it's true what they're saying, that this hodgepodge doesn't always carry the same meaning as the intended prayer.
Okay, good. So that concern, Florine affirms, that's a legitimate concern, that if we just translated all the prayers into another language, something might indeed be lost.
Yeah.
But let me articulate an opposite concern, which is that if we don't translate the prayers, but give people a perfect Hebrew formula, but they don't really understand what they're saying, is that prayer? Is that a good prayer? Is that something's been gained? They're getting that language training, but hasn't something been? What is the point of saying Adonai Echad if I have no idea what I just said? And I mean, that is the situation that many of us are in all the time, and I am in it sometimes. I mean, I've been doing this for decades, and still, sometimes I'm like, well, I don't know what I just said. Those words didn't look familiar to me, because they're just, archaic words that in some prayer I don't usually say. Right? It takes a long time to get to the point where you understand this at all, and you'll never have total mastery. And yet there is some desire here that we say our prayers in Hebrew, and it's important for us. We don't have enough time left in the hour to really answer the question, why is that important? But it is important for us to think about this concern. Was it ethnic? Was it national? Was it cultural? Was it theological? What is it about making sure that the people speak the Hebrew? All right, let's take one more pass at that from Leah, and then we'll look at one final development in our prayers. Leah?
I think it's important to try to attempt to say the prayers in whatever Hebrew you can muster, because it sends us the message that it's not just about me, my finite lifetime. It's about something way back. And I take great comfort and support in that. My petty concerns were probably the petty concerns of somebody 3,000 years ago. And we're dialing the same phone number with varying degrees of success. But that's one of the great joys for me. If the first time I could actually decipher a Hebrew letter, I will never forget as being a peak moment. I can't even really describe why. I think I've said why.
Yeah, no, you've said it very, very beautifully. You said it very beautifully, because I think that is also a piece of our prayer experience. It's very easy to start critiquing it, and I keep using words like dense and cumbersome, and and maybe we don't even know what we're saying. The critique is there. The worry about standardization is there, but there are so many gains that we get with standard prayer, and we've been speaking about some of them. The communal aspect of it. Ezra seems to have some concerns, but Leah articulates one that I think we haven't spoken out yet, which is just this idea that when I say an Amidah, I am saying the same thing that my ancestors said, and that's powerful. And it's the same words, and when we Kol Nidrei. What if I told you this year, I'm a liberal rabbi, we're not going to say Kol Nidrei, we're just going to talk about the things that we're just going to what's on your heart for what you want to let go of this year? I mean, it's nice, but you just had Erev Yom Kippur without Kol Nidrei, without saying those words. That's powerful. That's an effect. And maybe it didn't emerge from my heart, but it does something to my heart, doesn't it? Right? So there's something there too. There's something there in that. Okay, I see one hand up, but I want to make sure that I take us to Rabbi Zaki was right. This whole thing has been getting us to 18, but the truth is we got to get to 19 eventually. They're actually, for all of this talk and for the very fact that we call the Amidah the Shmona Esrei, the 18, if you sat and counted, suddenly you would realize, wait, there aren't 18, there are 19. So we have to give that history as well. Before we do, though, I promised we would at least have the takeaway of the 3 types of prayer that are in these 18. But next week we will look in greater depth. But this is just a preview. Maimonides says that when Ezra saw this, they arose and instituted the 18 blessings. So here, this gets back to Payam's question about types of prayer. And it is true, and as I said, we'll look at it next week, but it's a very important thing to take note of. The first 3 blessings in the Amidah are considered Shevach blessings, praising God. First 3 blessings, you just say, God, you are awesome, you are fantastic, you are the shield of Abraham, you are the reviver of the dead, you are holy. Okay, that's the first 3. The middle, meaning the middle 12, were requests. Okay, this was the category of prayer that Payam was most suspicious of, is actually the main category, the one in the middle, the 12 in the middle. Okay, so if there are 18 blessings, 3 are praise, 12 of them are requests, and then the final 3 are thanks. Right? And it worked. There's a kind of rhythm there. We'll talk more about it next week, but let's just speak it out one more time. First, you say, God, you are awesome. Then you say, hey, awesome God, I need a few things from you. And then you say, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Okay? So it's a pretty, but it gives us 3 prayer categories. And I think, isn't there a book called Please, Thanks, Wow, or something like that? It's by Anne Lamott or something like that. There's a book out there of sort of, pop spirituality, but maybe very good book about different modes of prayer. And I think it echoes this triad, which we'll look at more next week. It's not just Zelo Stam. It's not random that they pick these 3 categories. These are 3 major categories for us to put a lot of thought into. You are awesome. I need something from you. I am thanking you for what I have received. Okay. All right. So keep that in mind for next week. But let's finish our journey from 0 to 18, now to 19, by looking at the next development, which takes place hundreds of years later, now after the fall of the Second Temple, and now we're really in the Talmud and the early centuries of the new millennium, first and second centuries, and suddenly there is a felt need for one more blessing. Now, if Ezra and his court were concerned with linguistic and cultural dissipation, look at what Rabban Gamliel, the great leader of the era of temple destruction, look at what he's concerned with. It's a very different concern. Okay, so this we didn't cover this, but it's an interesting point you can take a look at. That basically that once we have the standard prayers, then you can add to them, but you can't take away, and that sets a whole tone for a Jewish ritual. Once you've got it, then you can't go back. You can only add to it, but for your perusal later. But let's make sure we get to 19. Now, in the days of Rabban Gamliel, there was a proliferation of heretical sects in Israel, right? Apikorsin, heretics in Israel. And they would attack Israel and incite them to turn away from God. When Rabban Gamliel saw how overwhelming this phenomenon was, he and his court arose and instituted a blessing asking God to wipe out the heretics. And he fixed it into the prayers so that it would be on everyone's tongue. And so it was that the number of blessings rose to 19. So it's like, what? He's not going, it's called the Shmoneh Esrei. It's a nice, high number. It's like even number. All of a sudden slips a new one in just 90, Birkat HaMinim. It's in, if you look at your Amidah, you'll find it there. And we have a record that this one wasn't in the original, which after all isn't original to begin with. They just slipped in a new one. And the concern here is that there are heretics around us. And, that's true to a certain extent. We know that Rabban Gamliel lived at a period when the temple had destroyed, and there was all kinds of debate over how are we going to do this Judaism thing now? Groups like the Essenes, the Zealots who wanted a more military approach, and of course, right, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And of course, what's the other big group that arises around that time? Our friends, the Christians, right? That's also going, nobody speaks that out, but that's also going on here, right? So Rabban Gamliel takes it upon himself and his court to stick another blessing in. And the blessing says, basically, God, do away with these heretics. And now all of Israel will recite that every single day, 3 times, do away with these heretics. All right. So that's ending on a little bit of a aggressive, mean-spirited note, right? Like a combative note. But I want us to end, we're out of time, but we'll just take a couple more minutes to consider this last move. Because we started out with no formal prayer at all. And then we got a robust system of 18 blessings that were all in response to the need to standardize for linguistic reasons, for cultural reasons, for reconstituting the community reasons. But Rabban Gamliel's got a different agenda, which is that there are different, not a linguistic retraining, but an ideological retraining. And that prayer, he saw, just as Ezra saw as the medium to address the language culture problem, Rabban Gamliel sees it as a medium to address the theological problem, right? The ideological problem. And I want to leave asking this question: is prayer a good medium for that? Does that make sense to you? That if the Jewish community is under some kind of threat, some kind of attack, then we can program ideological strength with our prayers. We stick into the prayers what we want people to think, right? That's a funny formulation, right? It's a weird idea. What does Rabban Gamliel think? Oh, and if I say this 3 times a day, I definitely won't become Christian, right? What is he thinking? All right, so let's just take one last minute or two to think about this. Now, I know Kathy's got a hand up from before, but I want to tee this up. So any thoughts on this? Kathy, Joe, anyone else?
Well, my comment is a little related. I mean, it was from earlier, but I don't know. I sort of see this whole thing as being a kind of a corrective to the Tower of Babel. You know, it's where the dispersion and a diversity of language is actually a kind of it's almost, well, it's a punishment, but it's certainly, you know, a kind of you know, this bad thing that everyone's dispersed, everyone's out there linguistically, but I suppose ideologically as well.
Yeah.
This is some attempt to kind of counteract that, to be a kind of corrective for that, and to find some sort of, you know, so I don't know. I think that's sort of definitely there, and then part of it is not just linguistic kind of standardization, but it's written language as opposed to oral language. I mean, you could theoretically have standardized oral language, but really you can't control it in the way that you can control written language. And so I think those two things really stand out. And I suppose the same applies to ideology as well, that you can standardize ideology better in written than oral.
Great. Okay. We have to close, so I won't drag us out any longer, but that's a good kind of and strange place to leave off. Thinking about the way we have a little bit of a history of how we got to our prayers, so that's just good information. And next week we'll look at the structure of those blessings and which ones are in there, and if they're putting new things in there. I mean, could we put new things in there? There's lots of questions that emerge, but one of the things that we have seen along the way, and especially so here at the end, is that Jewish prayer, has been taken up by community leaders, somewhat surprisingly, as the vehicle through which they can try to influence the behavior of the people that they're overseeing, right? You could see that as controlling, manipulative, or you could see it as a genuine concern for communal solidarity. But however you see it, it's to me at least an unexpected move, that you would look at the community and say, oh my goodness, they really don't know Hebrew. What do we do? Or you would look at the community and say, oh my goodness, they're really starting to celebrate Christmas. Well, what do we do? And you would think, you know what? Let's have them say some prayers that speak to that problem. Let's have them say the prayers in Hebrew. That'll get them. Let's have them say the prayers against heretics. It's a strange idea, and there may be, and I leave you to wonder, there may be a deep psychology there. There may be some wisdom there that if I repeat something every day often enough, the language will seep into me. The ideas will seep into me, even if I'm not the one who came up with the language and the ideas. Maybe. Or on the other hand, maybe it just leaves us, you know, speaking of the Tower of Babel, just babbling Hebrew that we don't understand, saying prayers that actually don't reflect what's going on inside of us, right? So this is an uncertain place that we have gotten to, and yet it is the very foundation for the prayers that we say every day. So we'll keep digging. We'll keep unearthing. Next week we'll look at some of the texts of those 19 blessings themselves. Okay. Wish everybody a good night and a night. I hope we can carry a little bit of the Hanukkah light with us into the darkness of winter. Love you all.